evening. Tonight I figured I'd continue my little exploration of Fairview, Pennsylvania. And I had a big pile of stuff I found, and I was going to try to do it all in one video, but I think I'm going to split it up. So, tonight's video, I figured I'd try to focus it on downtown, or not downtown, I guess, Main Street interests, or like the main, like the businesses and the buildings within town. And then I divided it up into other things like the I'll have a video in the future about the Scott store in Fairview, and then one about the churches in Fairview, and then one about the Maxwell family, and also the Mildred Work family. And those will all come separately. And I brought the pile of papers from this. Well, it used to be like this, and then I brought it down to this for tonight. And what I'll do is I'll put these pictures up, and I'll talk behind it, and let you see all this stuff. And I hope you enjoy it, and come along and learn a little bit of history here. This here is a picture of the old school in Fairview. It's from around 1910, somewhere around there. And they're standing right behind the school building. You can see a little shed behind the building there, behind all the people. And the kids used to go outside, and they used to throw coal back and forth on top of the shed for fun. And I'm not sure what else. I can't pick out anyone out in this picture that I know, but I'm sure there's a lot of people. I think that I shared it to someone one time, and they need some people out of there. But the next picture here, next couple pictures are the schoolmaster, and I believe it's D.F. McKee. He's the one that was like the superintendent back in the day. And you can see inside the school, it's pretty messy. There's books and everything to dispute about the whole school. And it'd be kind of nice, I think, to have half those books, but who knows what happened to them. They probably got thrown away. The next picture here is also of the school. It's probably one of the last classes that graduated from the Fairview School. I think it's closer to 1920s. I think that the last class graduated in mid-1920s, maybe late 1920s. I'm not really sure about that. If someone can correct me, they can comment and let me know. This next photo here is pretty neat. It is downtown or Main Street, Fairview. The building that's pretty prominent right in the center right is the old Adams House Hotel, which is now a one-story house. And I was told by the neighbor that used to live there, Fern Dembeck, that they cut the first floor out and lowered the upstairs down to the ground level. My father owns that property now, and I looked inside of it, how they constructed it, and I think they tore the whole thing down and rebuilt it, but I'm not really sure which story is correct, but Fern seemed to think that they cut the first floor out and then brought it down, and she lived up there up until she was about 98, and then I think she died not too long ago. But the building beside it on the right too, there's a big tall brick building there. That there was the old bank, and there was another building beside it, a grocery store. I'm not sure what happened to it. It must have been torn down in this photo. The bank had a elevator in it, and I think there was a mishap with the elevator. I was told it malfunctioned and a lady fell off 2 floors into the basement. And my old childhood bedroom was right over the old elevator shaft, so I never got haunted or anything. But the wooden building beside it in the far right, that was a Campbell Millinery shop. They sold hats and other clothing for women. If you look on the right side of the photo, there's a wood boardwalk. The trees along the road there's a series of about 5 or 6 trees. That's in front of the old it's the old Gibson mansion. Today it's a rental property, 2 different rental properties. And then the house you can barely see at the end of the trees there is the house directly across from my parents. It used to be Sally Michael's house, and then before that it was a Midwork's grandparents' house. And then beyond that, you can see some other buildings there. The building kind of in the center to the left, I think, was the old post office in town. This next photo, this was the Samuel Ekus house. And it used to stand right at the intersection when you came up from Petrolia into Fairview at the T. It was to the left on Hayesville Road. It got torn down here about, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago. It was in bad disrepair. It wasn't lived in for years and years. And back in the day, I think a lot of people remember it as the old like red insel brick house. I think the Harmon family lived in it in the 1920s, and then I'm not sure who lived in it after all those years. But back in the day, the Samuel Ekus built it. He was big in oil, and that's why the house is so fancy. And I was told it had a birthing room for like an expectant mother to have her child, and it also had a dance, like a ballroom or like a dance area. And I never got to see the inside of it. I wish I did, but and I'm just looking here. This next photo, I'm not really sure where this happened at, but by the looks of it, it came from Fairview, and it looks like it came somewhere maybe. I'm not really sure, but these three people here, they're surveyors, and it looks like in the background they might be digging, or maybe they're trying to locate an oil well or do something like that. I have no idea who they are, or it's probably from 1910, I think, 1900. This house here, this was the Thomas Hayes house, the Senator Thomas Hayes. And this is a house I talked about earlier that in the 1920s and 30s, a family tried to buy it, and then they tried to burn it down. And their plot really didn't work out, and they ended up tearing down the whole house. But the foundation is still there. If you're coming down Main Street in Fairview and you come to the intersection to get North Washington, on the left-hand side is a Clayton house. And that house sits on top of the old foundation of this house. And they, Mildred Work, she was one of my friends growing up, and she was in her, I think, maybe late 80s when I started talking to her. But she used to go up to the balcony, or she was actually up in the tower of this house, and you could see the Hoya de Petrolia back then. Today, I don't think you can really do that with all the trees that have grown up, but she used to tell me that they made sauerkraut in the house, and they would have it in the downstairs hallway, and you could smell it through the whole house. But I make sauerkraut too, but I don't think it's that pungent. But back then, maybe they made it differently. This picture here, this is a picture of the McKee family and other women in town. There's some of the Maxwell families in this photo. And the house behind them is currently the Brothers family house on Chestnut Street in Fairview. There's a big iron gate behind there, and I think somewhere, I'm not really sure about this, but I think the Maxwell family that owned the foundry used to own the Brothers house, but then they moved to the house across the road, and then the McKee family bought the house that they moved out of. It's a big, really large house, and the McKee family, that's the same one from the school I showed earlier, the schoolmaster, D.F. McKee, and they had might be a subject for a different later movie, but there was a lot of history behind that too, because his daughter Eleanor McKee married Frank McGee, and there's a story behind all that. It's interesting too, if you notice in the back of the picture there's a lady with her face turned. That was Ella Maxwell, and she had a defect on her face. So in all the photos, you can tell who Ella Maxwell is, because one side was deformed, or maybe she had a stroke or something happened, but she always turned one way, so I guess the nicer side showed. But I'm not really sure the whole history behind that either. But this next photo here, this was in front of the Mildred Work's old house in Fairview. It was right beside the old Gibson mansion, the current day rental property. And this was the original house on the property. It sat real close to the road. It was probably built in the 1830s or 40s. And in 1923, I think, they tore it down and built the current house that's there now. It's also rental property, and it's being pretty much destroyed right now. In this next photo here, you can see the old house. It was all covered with vines, and you can tell how old the house is. Had wooden shingles on it, unpainted clapboard siding. In the next photo here, you can see, I think this probably was Mildred's mother, Fanny Work, walking on the wooden boardwalk in downtown, or on, I keep calling it downtown, I'm not sure why, on the Main Street. Pretty neat picture there. And then here's a series of pictures of the progression of the house over the years. So you can see at the top the old house and at the bottom the current house. And here's another couple pictures here. 2 pictures of the current house. And if anyone's familiar with this today, they can tell that how much it has suffered since Mildred had died. It's in bad shape now. And there's a chair on the bottom picture in the front porch, and I actually have that chair now. Here's a picture of Fairview Main Street, and in the background you can see the Adams Hotel, the Adembeck house I talked about earlier, and the old bank. And I'm not really sure what this group of women are up to here. There's a little parade going on. I'm not sure if it's like a suffrage march, or maybe at that time, like I think it's from like 1899. It might have been like a temperance march. Fairview had a real strong disliking the alcohol. They wanted to be a dry town, and this might have been what that was connected to. But on the far left here, you can see a few people sitting there, and that was the old. I need to think of the name. Well, I can't think of it right now, but I'll think about it in the future. But it was someone I knew. And here's a picture of the ladies of Fairview Post 107, the Grand Army of the Republic. So this is probably from the 1880s, 1890s, and it's all connected to the Civil War, the veterans. That's the back of the photo there. And this here, this photo was the Roxbury family. And to be specific, it was, I need to look at the photo myself, make sure I get it right. It was Carl Roxbury and Flo Roxbury. They lived in the old Gibson mansion, and in the 1930s or 1940s, I think it might have been, he was painting the house up on the 3rd floor. It must have been a pretty long ladder because the house is pretty tall. But he fell through the attic window and nearly cut his arm off. And my great uncles were across the street. They lived up there right across from the house. And they witnessed the whole situation, and they called the ambulance. And back then, the ambulance service in the area was at Hepler Funeral Home. And they came up and got him and tried to revive him, and he died in the Butler Hospital. And his wife, Flo Roxbury, she just died probably about 5 to 10 years ago. So that's a little bit of history about that house. This picture here is pretty neat. It's in front of the old bank building on Main Street, and the guy in the very middle with a hat and a suit, that is Senator Hayes, Thomas Hayes. And he must have been there inspecting his funds in his bank. But there's a bunch of other guys here from Fairview. There's no names or anything on it, but it's pretty neat to see the old building there. In this next picture here, this was, I forget the names exactly on the photo, but it was, I believe, Isaac Davis on the left, which would have been Mildred Work's grandfather, and then Squire Ray on the right. And the house behind them is the house that sits right at the corner of Main Street and West Sunbury Street. And it's all remodeled today. They got it fixed up pretty nice. This next photo here, this was the old Rogers farm in Fairview. And this is a relation to the Mildred Work. It's I think the Dietrich family owned it a while ago. I think they might still own it today. And it's still standing down there on North Washington Street, nearly at the borough limit. Well, I hope you learned something. At the end of this video here, I'll have a couple things that's come up on the end of the screen just for some extra little knickknacks I have for general Fairview stuff. And please like and subscribe to my page, and thank you for watching this video.